Donald Trump.
Hi there, Anita. Yes, the focus earlier on today, as Anita was saying with that working breakfast, was about business and what this trip might achieve in terms of trade. So let's talk more about that with Ben Digby, International Director of the Confederation of British Industry, and also Dr. James D. Boys, an American policy analyst. Welcome, both of you. James, from the American perspective, then, how do you think this visit is going so far?
I think it's going great. I think the optics are great. I appreciate the skies are opening as we speak, unfortunately, but there's going to be some great imagery for Donald Trump to take home with him. He's been long looking forward to this trip. You saw the imagery coming out of the banquet at Buckingham Palace last night. That's all boding very, very well for him, I think. He's managed to avoid any obvious protests at this point. I know many are scheduled for this afternoon. I'm sure he won't have objected at all to not having to deal with Jeremy Corbyn, quite frankly, last night. And quite frankly, the Labour Party are playing into his hands in terms of giving him an axe to grind against at this point.
Why do you think that is playing into his hands?
Because both sides are using this antagonism between left and right for their advantage. Sadiq Khan certainly knew what he was doing when he put that statement out before the President arrived. The President played into that. The idea now that Jeremy Corbyn isn't going to be, didn't attend last night, he's out in the streets protesting. This very much, I think, gives Donald Trump what he wants. He's got an angle. He can use this to create a wedge issue and talk about problems where maybe they didn't exist beforehand.
So I know obviously you're talking about it from the American perspective, but it sounds like America's getting more out of this than us at the moment.
Well, this is a state visit, and a lot of people are asking why a state visit. Well, of course, Donald Trump is head of state as well as the head of their political party over there. There's no doubt, I think, that what you're seeing is a celebration of the relationship between the United States and Great Britain. We saw the pomp last night, the politics today, the history and the military tomorrow. People talk about the end of the special relationship all the time, but I think actually what we're seeing is a celebration of that, not the end of it.
So, Ben, from the business point of view, how useful do you think this visit is?
Well, we talk about the special relationship. There's a special economic relationship which exists between the US and the UK. I think the meeting which has just happened in number 10 is an opportunity to talk about that. The UK has actually been the largest foreign investor in the United States for a number of years, much, much higher than even Canada on the border and Japan, the other big investors. And that supports 1 million jobs in the United States. So whether you're in Arkansas or you're in Alaska, there are Americans, 250,000 of them, in the manufacturing sector who are going to work for a British company in the United States. And I think that's a positive thing. The President hasn't always been positive about trade and investment. I think the main message this morning that the business leaders would have been delivering is be positive about this relationship because British investment is creating American jobs.
And what about the other way around?
Well, it's a two-way relationship. One of the interesting stats I think the President's been talking about is that 70 tech companies in the UK out of our 250 are American tech companies. So whether it's tech, innovation, 1 million people also employed here by American businesses, this is a successful economic joint venture between our countries.
So in terms of who holds most cards then in these negotiations, would you say it's fairly equal?
Well, look, I've been to America meeting many trade negotiators, and when you talk to trade negotiators around the world, they say trade negotiations are not easy. There are no friends in trade negotiations, and I think we've seen that with our own experience in the Brexit negotiations. So no, look, it's not going to be easy, and America is the toughest country to negotiate with. But there are so many things that we can do, actually, without needing a free trade agreement. One of the things that I've experienced in the US, traveling there for the last few years, is that quite often UK companies can arrive maybe in New York at JFK and they think about the US as a single country. Actually, it's a single country but with 50 different markets, and the opportunities and the challenges, the restrictions on doing business are very different if you're in Atlanta or Houston than they are in New York.
James, we're just seeing pictures of the President, the First Lady and Theresa May and her husband inside Downing Street earlier. They didn't shake hands, or at least there were a few handshakes, but not between the President and the Prime Minister in Downing Street. Do you think that's significant?
Well, I'm not ever convinced there was a particularly warm relationship between Donald Trump and Theresa May. A lot of people, I'm sure, are going to be looking at this and studying the body language, but let's not kid ourselves. Theresa May is preparing to leave the political scene. Donald Trump is already moving on, I think. We see this in the past between presidents and prime ministers. As soon as one of them announces their departure, all eyes move to the eventual successor. Obviously, Donald Trump has talked up Boris Johnson ahead of this trip. it's going to be interesting to see how that develops in terms of a relationship, certainly. But I think that it's in both the United States' interests and Great Britain's interests for that relationship to continue, just as was being discussed, both from a political point of view as well as from a business point of view.
So, I mean, you're saying obviously it's the office, not the personalities that matter. Ben, when it comes to trade, though, how important are personalities?
I think politics and personalities are important to a certain extent. They set a tone for a relationship, but actually, as we've been talking about, this is a relationship that is enduring, it's long term, and from a business perspective, one of the things which would have happened this morning is you've got business people meeting other business people, thinking about what they can do together. And actually, trade agreements, yes, the politicians are really interested in them, but it's really those business conversations on a day-to-day basis which make a difference here.
James, is it unfortunate, the timing, the fact that it is at the tail end of a premiership here, and so the direct talks between those two leaders are founded on the fact that they're not going to be it's not going to be an enduring relationship? Yeah,
it's incredible, isn't it? If you think about it, when this initial invitation was extended by Theresa May, the first foreign leader to visit Donald Trump as president, who could have imagined that when that state visit eventually arrived, it would be in effectively Theresa May's final days as prime minister? So the great challenge here is that, you know, these meetings are taking place, but they're taking place on the basis that everybody knows that there's going to be a team moving out, and who the team moving in at this point is not yet known. So you do have some very interesting negotiations, but those negotiations are going to continue, whoever replaces Theresa May in Downing Street in the coming weeks.
And we know that actually he is going to be meeting Michael Gove. That's a meeting that's happened at the request of the president. Do you think that's interesting? Because previously the comments that he's made about who might take over have been focused on Boris Johnson.
They have indeed, and you have to ask whether perhaps Donald Trump has been made aware of some of the comments that Boris Johnson has made about Donald Trump in recent years, which have come into light, which are less than complimentary about the president. So it's interesting. I think Michael Gove will be delighted, quite frankly, to be given this this opportunity. But, you know, as was being said, with regard to business and politics, the linkage between them is vital. And these politicians from the United States all want the same thing. They want to bring bacon home to their state and bring business to their own communities. And if they can do that here in the United Kingdom and bring business interests, they are going to coalesce with political interests. So what's good, quite frankly, for British business is good for the United States, and particularly for Donald Trump heading into an election year, when he's talked about bringing manufacturing and trade and jobs back to the United States.
Ben, what do you make of the president's comments on Brexit and him saying that he thinks that no-deal Brexit would actually be a good thing?
Well, I think he probably thinks it's in the interest of America because it opens the door to a big free trade agreement. And look, you know, from a business perspective, when we talk to companies around the UK, they're very clear on two things. No deal would be catastrophic for the UK economy, but they're enthusiastic about doing more business with the United States. So it's not an either or choice. We need to prioritise our relationship with Europe, but there are, as I said, lots of opportunities for us to do more business, more trade, more commercial discussions with the US without needing to do a comprehensive free trade agreement.
What will be the sort of the primary legacy, the primary thing that Trump will take home from this trip, do you think?
Well, I mean, it depends what comes out of this presser this afternoon, potentially, but I wouldn't expect any great policy developments, quite frankly. I know there was talk ahead of time of making some great strides with regard to a trade deal between Great Britain and the United States. That was frankly never on the cards. We're not really in a position to do that at this point. I think that what Donald Trump will be taking away from this, however, is this idea of being seen as an international statesman. Very often American presidents focus on the domestic in the first term and turn to the international realm in the second term. Well, Donald Trump has got a state visit in his first term that allows him, I think, to position himself very nicely moving into Iowa and New Hampshire next year, when he'll be faced by a rather piddling crowd of Democrats, quite frankly, who are going to look rather inconsequential next to Donald Trump, having been able to tour the world, travel the world, and present himself as a statesman and an international salesman on behalf of American business and politics.
James Du Bois, Ben Digby, thank you both very much. Back to you, Anita.